Today, we're focusing on AncestryDNA's shared matches. Please stick around to the end where I'll share tips of making the most of your shared matches. These tips could be the keys to unlock the next big genealogical discovery in your family tree. Before we talk about what shared matches are, let's talk about our DNA match list. Our DNA match list are people who share DNA with us because we have common ancestors. Like my mom and my dad, we have the common ancestors of my grandparents, which are their parents. We've got my brother and sister who share my parents with me, and I have uncles and aunts who share my grandparents with me, which are their parents. That's what our DNA match list is. And it can go way back to fourth, fifth, sixth cousins who share distant ancestors, but we have common ancestors. This diagram illustrates some of the people who could be on your DNA match list. Remember, DNA matches are people who share DNA with you. We all get our DNA from our parents. You get half from your dad and half from your mom. So you and your sibling both got some of the same pieces from your dad and your mom. So you share DNA because of your common ancestor, your parents. Now you also share DNA with your parents because they gave you that DNA. And your parents got their DNA from their parents, your grandparents. And your cousins also got DNA from your grandparents. So you and your first cousins share DNA because you both got some of the same pieces from your grandparents. The same with second cousins. You got DNA from your great-grandparents because they passed it down to your grandparents, who passed it down to one of your parents, who passed it down to you. And the same thing happened on your second cousin. And it got passed down, and you and your second cousins got some of the same pieces of DNA. So you are DNA matches, and they show up on your DNA match list. Now let's talk about shared matches. Again, this is my DNA match list, people who share DNA with me because we have common ancestors, and I've went further down in the list this time. But one of my matches is David. We share 121 centimorgans of DNA, and I've added this note that our common ancestors are James Merrill and Nancy Waldron through their son Norman. And that means David got DNA from James and Nancy through their son Norman, and I got DNA from James and Nancy through a different child. Now let's click on David to get to his shared matches. When we come to this page, we can click on shared matches. And these are people who share DNA with both David and with me. Now I want to point out that I have this green Pro symbol here. That's because I pay the extra $10 a month to get the Pro tools. And that gives me this third column. So you might see just 2 columns or you might see 3 depending on if you have the Pro or not. If you don't have the Pro, I believe it asks you if you want to sign up right here. And so these are the shared matches. I have this long list here of people who share DNA with both David and myself. Now let's look at a different DNA match. This is Charles. This time I have question marks. That's my shorthand for saying I haven't proven this yet. There is a common ancestor hint. And so I need to go through and find records and make sure I agree and that this is correct. AncestryDNA is giving me a hint, a common ancestor hint, that Charles and I are both descendants of Augustus Merrill and Sarah Eastwood. And so they're saying, I know I got DNA from Augustus Merrill and Sarah Eastwood, and they think Charles got some too. But I still have work to do. That's why there's the question marks. Now, Augustus Merrill is the son of James Merrill and Nancy Waldron that we just saw as a match with David. So I share 39 centimorgans of DNA with Charles. Now, if we go back to David's page and do a search, we're going to look for Charles. And so I can type this match name. I can say Charles. So we're seeing he should show up as a shared match. And so we're going to search for him. Remember, he shared 39 centimorgans of DNA. I'm going to close this. And here we have Charles. So again, David and I share DNA. Charles and I shared DNA. You could see that here. And now we know that David and Charles also share DNA with each other. Now, if you don't have the Pro Tool, you can't see how much. But since I do, that's what this third column is. It's showing that Charles and David share 28 centimorgans of DNA. We can see that David, Charles, and I all got DNA from James Merrill and Nancy Waldron, and so we're shared DNA matches. Now let's get practical. I'm going to show you how you actually get to your DNA match list and to your DNA shared matches. To get to your shared matches, you need to click on DNA from the home page and then DNA matches. Now mine blurs because I have a special program running to keep things privatized. Yours won't look like that. And here we have our DNA match list. To get to the shared DNA matches, we can click on any match. I'm going to click on my dad. And when you get to this match page, this one-to-one page, you can click on shared matches. Really, you just click on a match, then you click on shared matches, and you can see this page of people who match both you and the match you chose, and they're listed right here. Now let's go back to the one-to-one relationship page between you or me and David and talk about what we see here. First of all, we have the person's name. I'm going to scroll down a bit. We have Max, Charles, K, and R. Now these could be real names. Again, I have a special program on that's blurring things and removing names, but this could have the real last name. Sometimes we have usernames like Hello Kitty, and other times we have initials and then it's managed by someone. Next, we might have these common ancestor hints. This is when somebody has a linked tree, so their DNA is linked to their tree, and your DNA has to be linked to your tree. If you don't know how to do that, leave a comment and I can make a short video about that. But when we have these common ancestor hints, it means Ancestry thinks they figured out how you and a person are related. So in this case, how Max and I are related. And I could look at that and then I need to do the genealogy research. It also shows you what types of trees. When you see this symbol is a public linked tree. And so we can look at that tree and they have linked their DNA to it. We also have these. They have trees, but they've made them private. But Ancestry can still search those, so we can still get these hints as long as they're linked and they didn't mark it unsearchable. If we scroll down a bit, we can also see this symbol next to Mary. That means there's no tree. So there's no tree there. There's still ways we can figure out who she is. If you look down in the description, I'll have a link to my video all about enhanced shared matches, which is really helpful for identifying people that even don't have a tree. Those are the different types of trees. We have this plus button if you're a pro user, where you can specifically add or edit the relationship, the groups, which are basically those colored dots, or your notes. Then we have a relationship estimate. This is my estimated relationship to Max. It says it's about a third cousin once removed or half third cousin. But if we click on this, it will get more specific. And it says we're actually predicted to be any of these relationships. And we can go more deeply to see that there's really about a 35% of chance that it's one of these, 33, 25, and even some lesser possibilities. The main thing I want you to remember is these are estimates. They do not know how you're related or how I'm related to Max until I do the genealogy research. It will also show you how many centimorgans of DNA you share. It will show whether it's paternal or maternal or even both or unassigned. It might say parent 1 or 2 if you haven't told it which is parent 1 and which is parent 2. If you have the Pro Tools, you have this third column, which is how David is related to these same people. Again, we used Charles earlier, and it's saying that David and Charles are approximately fourth cousins or half third cousins once removed, and they share 28 centimorgans of DNA. Now I'm going to share some tips for using shared matches so that you can get the most out of this incredible tool. And it will start with actually a DNA match tip, and that is to identify as many of your close DNA matches as possible. Those are usually the easiest to identify because many of them, unless you're adopted or an unknown biological parent or grandparent, you'll know a lot of these matches, or maybe if you don't know them personally, you have other people who could help you. And if they have trees, you can look at the trees for names that you actually might recognize, or you'll see common ancestor hints. So first, figure out as many of those as possible and add notes. Even add these custom groups, these custom colors like I have here. That's tip number 1. Now, tip number 2 is to work with a group of shared matches. Here I've selected David again. Now, since David belongs to this Merrill/Waldron part of my family tree, these shared matches should basically be from that same part of my tree. And as we scroll down through these notes, we will see that. And that's one reason I love to keep the notes. So, James Merrill, Nancy Waldron. Bessie Merrill is their granddaughter. We have Augustus Merrill, who is their son. Here's another Augustus Merrill, Augustus Merrill. This is the same couple as the original, Augustus Merrill, Nicholas Merrill. And so this is all making sense. Nicholas Merrill is James's dad. That's the parents. And so everybody in this group should basically be from the same part of the tree. It gives us both a good idea of where to work, and it also can help us break through brick walls. Because if I wanted to solve a brick wall on this Merrill or Waldron part of my tree, I'm wanting to look at David and his shared matches to help me do that. And step number 3 is to use those common ancestor hints, which again are directly tied to ThruLines. And yes, they can be wrong for sure, but sometimes they're right and they provide valuable clues. And I've found many of mine to be right. And that's where I'm putting some of these marks in here. And so this one I've already added to my tree. That's my notation if there's no question mark. But we have this one here. And so if I went here, it would be suggesting that Max is also a descendant of James Merrill and Nancy Waldron. So Max got DNA from this couple, just like I did. And I can go through and work to prove or disprove that. And here's another, this one's closer because James Merrill is further back in time than Augustus. This would probably be easier to verify whether Charles belongs on my tree or not, and if they're correct about this relationship. But we're seeing those connections, so I'm looking at those hints. Tip number 4 is really tied into these common ancestor hints too, but use caution when making these conclusions. Again, DNA is just part of the puzzle. It doesn't solve things all on its own. We need to do traditional genealogy also, and we need to find the records that support what we're doing. And so if you're working all of this together, it should really help you build a solid tree with DNA. And so let's work through a real life case and see if we can add Charles to my family tree. And we're going to start by clicking on this common ancestor hint. Now here we can see Charles has a linked tree, but he's linked to this tree. It says there's 2 people. It's just private, but it's indicating that Charles is probably a descendant of Augustus Merrill and Sarah Eastwood. And I can click on this to get to that common ancestor hint, which is actually part of ThruLines. And so we get to this ThruLines hint, and this is pretty good. When we have these solid white boxes with a solid line instead of a dotted line, that means these people are already on my tree. And you can see I have Charles's dad or his supposed dad on my tree. And so I'm going to go over to our tree and see if I can add Charles to this tree. And so I'm really trying to keep this all privatized because this is a living person, but I was able to find an obituary, and it says that he is survived by his sons, and it includes Charles, and it gives the right last name because I can see the last name. And so I can now add Charles to my tree, and I've extended my tree. And now he's another person I know is descended from Augustus Merrill, and that he has DNA that he received from Augustus or his wife, and I can use it to keep growing my tree. Now, as I scroll down, I want to do a real life example and try to figure out how somebody on this list of shared matches with David and me, how they're related to me when we don't have a common ancestor hint and I don't have a note, so I haven't worked on them yet. And this person is known as N, and it says that they have an unlinked tree. And so we're hoping this unlinked tree is helpful. Now, when I popped over here looking to try to figure out how N is related to me, I see these trees that she has that were public, but she has not linked her DNA to them. And so it doesn't know who she is on these trees. But if you notice, she has a tree with one person, that's the Merrill family tree, and another one that I've privatized this, but this is also a Merrill family tree. So this makes sense. And I think I'm going to be able to figure out who she is. Let's click on this tree. And now when I look at the tree, I see her grandfather. So right here, her grandfather is Clarence J. Merrill. And I know who Clarence is. Let's look at my tree. Here on my tree, I have Clarence J. Merrill. And he is a grandson of James Merrill and Nancy Waldron, who you probably recognize. And so now I need to go back to her tree, and I need to prove who their son is, see if that's on my tree, the grandson, and then get down to her if I can figure that out. But pretty much I know, again, that this person in this group that was like the Merrills and the Waldrons, that she also got DNA from this Merrill-Waldron couple, and that's why she's a shared match, and that's why she's showing up in that particular group. And that's one way we can use our shared matches to expand our tree. And when we collect a bunch of these, we can start breaking through brick walls. Now, if you're excited about using DNA to solve your family mysteries, I've got a few resources for you. First of all, I put out a newsletter, and in it, I'm sharing tips. I'm sharing where I'm going to be speaking next, when I've created new YouTube videos, special announcements. So you can sign up for that below. And also, I recently created 2 different videos that you might find helpful. And they're both about enhanced shared matches and even working on brick walls and identifying more DNA matches. And you can find both of those linked below. So until next time, happy researching, and I'll see you in the next video.